Hi, I'm Dr. Marini Smith, and I wanted to share something that I worked on for the Climate Change Across the Curriculum project. I embedded a module into my Education 1 Introduction to Teaching class. So I'm going to walk you through what I did and share some lessons learned and some benefits to the students. So one of the first things that I had to think about was to start with the end in mind and what I wanted my students to accomplish. So I'll talk about that in a minute with the objectives, but even before that, I had to figure out where was I going to put this module. So I teach, again, Introduction to Teaching, and in chapter 8 of the student's textbook, there's a whole chapter on globalization. So I thought that would be a good place to put the climate change, because we're talking about global impacts across the world and how different things that are happening in the world with technology, diversity, and different movements that impact the way that we learn and the way that we interact with each other. So I thought that this would be the best place to put the module. So once I decided where I was going to put the module, and mind you, this particular class, students have to do 45 hours of field work in a public school. So they have to physically go to a school and do 45 hours over the course of 16 weeks. So I have to try to be mindful not to overload my students, because I know that even though it's a 3-unit class, they're still doing a lot of work outside of class. So luckily for me, the way that this module was originally, it wasn't too heavy. There wasn't too much content already, because I wanted students to focus on the field work. So I thought that it wouldn't be too overwhelming for them to add all of these different components for the climate across the curriculum. So chapter 8 again is globalization. So here I included learning outcomes from the chapter notes, the chapter PowerPoint, and then some additional information. There's a discussion. So these were things that were already there. So this is where I started adding information for the climate change across the curriculum project. So one of the things that I think I would highly recommend, this is one of the things that the reviewers commented that I had, was to give an introduction as to what the climate change initiative is at West, so that students even know, why are we doing this? Why is this here in the course? So I was part of the first cohort, so I was able to present it as something very exclusive, very exciting. And so I explained to students what the climate change center was, where they can access it, and kind of just getting them really excited about this idea. And I explained to them why I embedded it into chapter 8. So that's one thing that I would recommend. And I thought I had a link to the Climate Change Center. I don't think I have it here. Maybe I have it somewhere else, but I would recommend putting a link there so that they have an opportunity to get information about the Climate Change Center at West and all of the wonderful things that they're doing. And so again, starting with the end in mind, I had to think about what are the tangible deliverables that I wanted my students to take away from this lesson, from this embedded module. So I think about Bloom's taxonomy, and I wanted to kind of scaffold my students up so that it's not just all lower level remembering and comprehending. I wanted there to be some analysis. So I start with just having them be able to define what climate change is and explain at least 2 causes of climate change. Now, because I teach education, I have to be I teach students how to write lesson plans. And one of the hardest things about teaching lesson plans is getting students to write good objectives. And the objectives need to be observable and measurable. It needs to be something very specific that the evaluator, teacher, facilitator can observe and see that it's happening. So I think I did a pretty good job of doing that here. Students have to define what climate change is and explain at least 2 causes of climate change. So it's specific and it's measurable. Number 2, describe the significance of climate change and why it's important to understand its costs and impacts. So again, we're getting a little bit higher in the levels of cognition, Bloom's. And then number 3, even a little bit more complex, they need to analyze a climate change lesson plan and provide at least one accommodation that could be used to address the needs of diverse learners. And so this is something where I was thinking about what is really important for us in my discipline in teaching child development and education. And really, accommodations for diverse learners is super, super important. And that's one thing that students also tend to struggle with in writing their lesson plans, and making sure that whatever they are teaching, whatever the students are learning, that they are thinking about their diverse student population, and they are thinking about how can I make sure that this lesson is accessible to all of my learners. So if you have students with visual impairments, if you have students with sensory challenges, if you have students with mobility challenges, how am I adapting that lesson to meet those students' needs? So I wanted to embed that in my objectives for this module. Okay, so again, teaching education and just teaching in general, I always want to start kind of basic, so scaffolding up from simple to more complex. So first we want to talk about what is climate change. So talk about that. I also want to back up and say one of the things that I found a little bit challenging at first was there's just so much information out there about climate change, which is a good thing. But it was a little bit overwhelming for me to kind of weed through things. And Jo Tavares was very helpful. She did provide some resources to kind of have a starting point for looking at resources. I specifically wanted things that were student friendly because I'm thinking of the population of my students, and I want to model for them what they might be sharing with their own students in K-12. So I wanted to find things that were child friendly. So I found this great one from NASA climate change website. I also wanted to make sure that I'm humanizing this module because this is for an asynchronous Canvas course. So as you can see here, I am sharing myself talking about it.
Hi students, it's Dr. Smith, and I wanted to take some time to talk about a topic that is very important to all of us, and that is climate change. It's a topic you've probably heard a lot about. It's not going away, and it's really important that we understand climate change, particularly as future teachers who are equipping our youth and our students with knowledge and empower them to be change makers, to make an impact and really work to decrease the effects of climate change. But really, what is climate change? I wanted to share this really awesome website that breaks it down for our students in a way that is manageable and comprehensible.
Okay, so that's an example of how I introduced the lesson to them, and then I provided some information that I found from an outside source about what is climate change. And I included the source. And then I also give them another list of student-friendly videos that introduce climate change. And I asked them to think about how they might use one or more of these videos to enhance their own understanding of climate change, as well as their students' understanding of climate change. I also wanted to have them kind of think in a more evaluative way and think about what makes these videos engaging. So again, thinking of higher levels of cognition. So here are some fun videos that I found. Here's a little snippet of one.
Let's not beat around the rapidly melting iceberg here. Climate change is happening, and we are causing it. The evidence is overwhelming. Scientists usually reserve this level of agreement for claims like Earth is a planet or air is real. Yet here we are. The climate change ship has now left the dock, yet lots of people on shore are still debating whether...
So you can already see in just those few seconds how this might be engaging for students and broken down in a way that's easy to understand and very kind of cool and engaging with the visuals and sort of the comedic tone. So I also wanted to pose thought questions for my students. Now, even if I don't have students submitting work for everything, I do want to still include reflection questions. And I encourage them, even though I'm not collecting them, I say, how does this information thus far help to further your understanding of climate change? One way to help demonstrate our understanding of a topic is to teach it to someone else. And when we teach concepts to young children, we often have to break it down into simpler concepts. So monitor your understanding by, in your own words, writing down how you might explain climate change to a 7-year-old. So I'm very big on metacognitive techniques, and I'm able to kind of model that for my students and say, how are you monitoring your learning and evaluating your learning and thinking about the way that you learn best? And so I like to model strategies for them to think about their own metacognition and how they might use those same strategies with their own students. Okay, and then so once we've already established what climate change is, now we're thinking a little bit more complex, and why does it matter? What is the significance? What is the importance of it? So again, I am encouraging my students to activate their prior knowledge. This is another metacognitive technique, and I want them to reflect and write down, even though I'm not collecting it, what they've learned thus far in the module. So now this actually is something that they are submitting. So I'm asking students to think about what they already know about climate change, why they think it's important, and then they're going to write about what they know about the importance of climate change after completing the module. So I am going to be looking at their before and after. And then I include a rubric for how I'm going to be evaluating their reflection. And then I say, remember, start on this assignment before going on to the next page, because on the next page, they're going to be introduced to much more information about why climate change is important. And then this will be added to their prior knowledge of what they already knew about climate change. So here's a lot of great information from outside sources. We talk about all of the other kind of intersectional issues that climate change impacts. So things like the disproportionate harm to women and girls, the phenomenon known as eco-anxiety. So there's all of these different overlapping impacts of climate change that I really wanted my students to think about. It's not just about, our weather. There's so many other facets of climate change that really are important and affect all of us. Talk about biodiversity, etc. So, and down here, I wanted to bring a little levity and comic relief to the climate change crisis, because all of the information above was a lot heavier, content heavy, a little somber in tone. So this one is a little bit lighter, while still bringing the important information forward. So why should we care about climate change? Because snow leopards, turtles, and polar bears are awesome. Because you need your morning coffee fix. Because coral reefs are amazing. So kind of changes the tone of the module a bit. And so now that you've added to your prior knowledge schema, you can go back to the quick write assessment and add your response about why climate change is important. So it's kind of the pre and post. And then here I add an infographic, and again, to humanize this and to make it a little bit more comprehensible and engaging, I show a video clip of myself talking about this infographic that I found that does a really good job of kind of explaining. I found this really great program project called Climate Project online that has it's a whole bunch of modules in and of itself. And so I took some parts from that and embedded it here into my module, because I like the way that it flowed, and I liked all of the additional resources that it provided, including this infographic. It even had thought comprehension questions. So here are some of those questions, and I'm asking my students to make sure that they reflect on the questions, jot the responses in their notes, and that it will help them, giving them the rationale, because those questions will help them with other activities in this unit. So here are some of the questions, and again, this comes from this OER project called Climate Project that I found online. Okay, and so here is the actual intro video for Climate Project, and again, I am talking them through it, part one and part two. And then here I'm giving them timestamps to let them know throughout the video. I pause and I ask them questions. So I'm giving them the timestamps and letting them know where they can find those answers, such as how many tons of carbon emissions do humans produce every year, how is the release of greenhouse gases affecting the planet, etc. And then for me, it's really important to promote accountability with my students and reflection. So I do a mini quick check-in, a little quiz, climate project, did you get it? So there's just 5 questions that hopefully if students went through the module, they should do great on that, and they can use their materials as well to help them with those questions. Okay, and then for the action item, what can students do? We've learned a lot about climate change, why it's important. Let's think about ways we can fight climate change. So I give them lots of resources, some suggestions, some websites, um, tips from how to talk to kids about climate change without freaking them out. And then I really like this image too. How come none of you were at the climate change march? You can see all of the reasons, the irony, right? All of the reasons that tie right back to climate change. And then I also wanted to let students see an example of just one person who made a difference because I know it can seem overwhelming and daunting. So Greta Thunberg is one such person that is very inspirational, very empowered and passionate individual. And so this is a excerpt from her 2019 speech at the United Nations Climate Action Summit. So again, I'm reminding them that they can make a difference. One person can make a difference, and that is to prepare them for these climate change action opportunities. I want them to think of examples of things that they can do in their community or around the world, of people taking action through educating others, advocating for a policy, or pursuing a career. They need to list at least 2 examples. Then they're going to list one specific thing that they can do to help slow down climate change. So first, 2 examples of things that they've learned others have done in their community, and then one specific thing that they themselves will do. And then there's the rubric for that as well. And then, almost to the end here, one of the objectives was they needed to analyze climate change lesson plan. So there's a wonderful organization that I've worked with for years called Population Education. They do amazing work. I highly recommend you looking into them. They actually will come in person and do wonderful, engaging, hands-on, relevant lessons with your students, and they even provide students access to those lessons. So all about things that are related to how our population in the world impacts resources and other things. So I asked them specifically to pull out lesson plans that were geared around climate change. I typically work with them every year. So for this particular um, module, I asked for them to provide lesson plans that specifically highlighted the theme of climate change. And so they provided me with 3 lesson plans that I chose, and I gave students access to the lesson plan and then a brief description. And I have an assignment for them on the next page where they will be able to look at the lesson plan in depth and then provide analysis. So I have students assigned each different lesson plan based on the first letter of their last name. So they can do either counting carbon, people and climate change, the data is in, or carbon crunch. And so this is their task. They need to summarize the lesson. And again, I scaffold going from lower levels of cognition to higher levels. So first they're just summarizing the lesson, then they're explaining the main climate change concept explored in the lesson, providing at least one accommodation that can be used to address the needs of diverse learners. So for example, how might they adapt their lesson for an English learner, a GATE student, or an exceptional student with a disability? Then they need to evaluate the lesson plan by stating if they think it did a good job of meeting its objective, why or why not. And then I give them some resources to help with coming up with accommodations for diverse learners. And then there's the rubric. So they have now completed the climate change unit of the module. Woohoo! Congratulations. And then on the next page, they have what I like to call a learning celebration, which is essentially their assessment or test for the whole module. That would be for chapters 5 through 8 of the textbook. So again, this comes in week 12 of a 16-week course. What are some of the benefits to doing climate change across the curriculum? Well, hopefully you can see that there are many, many, but I would say some would be obviously raising awareness for students about climate change and the importance and the significance, how it impacts all of us. Also giving them an opportunity to think about a call to action and how they can make a change, showing them how they can integrate climate change curriculum throughout all content areas. And then also, because I teach future teachers, I am modeling for them what they can do in their own classroom. Some things you might consider trying is maybe having students assess or give feedback on the module. I didn't do that here, but that might be something that you might do. I'm trying out this integration of climate change. What did you think of it? What could I have done differently as an instructor? What would you have liked to see more of? What did you enjoy? What suggestions do you have? So that could be one. Also, maybe an open discussion or platform where students could share resources and ideas about climate change. So maybe my students have books or movies about climate change that they want to share in an open forum, so you can create a discussion um, so that students can have some sort of a depository where they can share all of those wonderful ideas. So hopefully that helped. Good luck on your climate change project. I know it's going to be great. Thank you for watching.